The first 365 days of my failed reef tank. This is my 40-gallon aquarium that I wanted to turn into a thriving reef ecosystem. Years ago this tank used to be a thriving reef, but I gave it up to pursue bigger dreams. I realized that there's nothing quite like a reef tank, so I figured I'll give it another go. This time I wanted to take a different approach. I wanted a reef tank that wasn't as demanding as my previous experience, so I planned to create a self-sustaining macroalgae reef tank. Even though clownfish are the most common saltwater fish known to mankind, I can't imagine a reef tank without them. They are beautiful fish, hardy, and full of personality. On day 3, I added beneficial bacteria to the tank, which is like an aquarium flash pass and allows you to add fish much sooner by speeding up the cycling process. Of course, the clownfish were not cool with being kidnapped and dropped into a new tank, so I cut the lights out and gave them time to adjust. On day 13, I added this beach portrait above the tank, and the clownfish felt more at home. The tank was also fully cycled at this point. By day 20, I started trying to manifest my dreams of a self-sustaining jungle reef tank. I planted my first pieces of macroalgae, including this red blade algae, some caulerpa, and some more red algae. A few days later, my second order arrived with some different types of caulerpa. The idea is to create a self-sustaining ecosystem where I feed the fish poop and it turns into nitrates, which is food for the marine plants. If I'm successful, eventually the plants will eat as much waste as the fish produce, and I won't have to do water changes. I got this idea from some of my freshwater tanks, which are living proof that this is possible. I rarely do water changes on these tanks because the plants remove all the nitrates that the fish produce. But the key is balance. I need the right amount of plants to equal the amount of waste that my fish produce. Day 31 is the day that changed the course of the reef tank forever. I saw that a local hobbyist was selling livestock from his reef tank for dirt cheap. The problem with buying livestock this way is that the items don't last long, and if you don't act fast, you miss out. This means that I had little time to actually think this through before introducing Fred. I also received an order of my first corals the same night. This is my reef tank on day 37, and it's starting to look like something. At this point, I added the skunk cleaner shrimp and a small cleanup crew of snails and hermit crabs to clean up after the fish. If you notice, Fred is in a new spot. And that's the thing about these anemones. They have a mind of their own, and they really do what they want, and you'll see more of that later. The reason why I went with an anemone in the first place is because clownfish feel more at home when there's an anemone in the tank, and my clownfish made it known that they definitely appreciated it. 45 days in, and the reef was ready for more fish. I added a candy hogfish, a bright yellow fish that's always on the move, along with a diamond watchman goby, another fish that's very active and surprisingly very smart. Within minutes of being in the tank, the goby started to build a home. By now the reef is starting to show maturity with algae covering most of the rocks. At this point I haven't done any water changes in the reef. The idea is that the more nitrates in the water, the better the macroalgae will do. You can see that at this point the caulerpa was absent because it melted back. This was normal for caulerpa, especially when introduced to a new tank. In a few days, they started to grow back. The key is to balance the fish bioload with the plant growth. Being that the plants are still young, it's good that I only have 4 fish and a few inverts. The problem, however, is that I really enjoy feeding this tank, and I would feed different foods up to 3 times a day, which was a disaster waiting to happen. By day 100, I snuck in another fish, a blue Springer damsel, a quiet fish with one of the best blues a fish can offer. I noticed that Fred changed too. Instead of his stringy tentacles, he now had more bubbly tentacles, which is what these anemones are known for. A few weeks later, and the caulerpa started to make a statement, stretching across the front of the tank. I added a few more corals and this magnetic shelf to the back wall to try to grow some green star polyps on the glass like with my old reef tank. On day 160, the caulerpa went sexual, so the leaves die and release spores into the tank. That's the plant's way of reproducing. That's good news and bad news. It's good news because we'll see more growth, but it's bad news because it might be uncontrolled growth. "200 days in, and the caulerpa starts to make a comeback. I added some more macroalgae. This is me making it rain with frozen foods. I fed my fish like this every other day, and it was way too much food, and my nitrates were quietly surpassing the amount that my plants consumed. A few days later, I introduced my 5th and 6th fish, my tailspot billini, and my possum raz. Meanwhile, Fred is 4 times the size that I got him. By day 250, the caulerpa stretched 3 feet across the front of the tank, and Fred is about 6 inches in diameter. This is when things started to take a turn. Notice the corals are not looking happy. Some had unpleasant encounters with Fred, who stings any coral that comes too close. Others were not happy with the water quality. Up to this point, I still haven't done a water change, and my nitrates were pretty high. Honestly, I wasn't testing the water, so I had no clue how bad this tank was getting. That's when I started to notice the first strands of hair algae. Instead of addressing the main issue, I hired some emerald crabs to clean up the hair algae. They ate some of it, but they also ate the caulerpa, so they didn't have a noticeable impact on the hair algae. Also, Fred is looking swole. Fred would disappear for the next few days. I had no idea what was happening, but on day 290 it was confirmed. Fred divided himself into 4 separate anemones. Also, the tank was turning into a caulerpa jungle. While it didn't look bad, I know some of the fish didn't appreciate the tangled forest, the hair algae was out of control, and a lot of the corals that you saw weeks earlier died. By the 320th day, I was fighting back. I did weekly water changes. I ripped out most of the caulerpa in the front to give space for the goby to sand sift. At this point, Fred is very aggressive, and I had to move corals out of his way or else he would slowly kill them. At this point, all 4 Freds had a combined reach of about 1 foot within the tank, so I can't add any corals within that area or Fred will sting them. One year later, and this is Fred's tank. There are 5 bubble tip anemones, and I'm sure that soon this tank will only have anemones. I do have corals in the tank, but I'm running out of space to keep them away from Fred. The hair algae is still an issue. I do bi-weekly water changes and remove as much as I can manually. I also remove some of the caulerpa monthly to keep it contained. Out of all my tanks, this is by far my most interesting. I enjoy the fish and the inverts in the tank, and even though Fred is taking over, he's pretty cool as well. I count this tank as a failure because my initial goal was to create a self-sustaining reef. This tank is neither self-sustaining nor the reef tank that I envisioned. At this point, I doubt I will go in the direction that I originally desired, but I still will chase the idea of a self-sustaining tank. Caulerpa is nice and forgiving, but I think I'll focus on different types of macroalgae, something a little bit more controllable. Anyways, that's been a look at the first year with my 40-gallon reef tank. Let me know your thoughts on this tanks in the comments, and also what do you think about Fred? Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.